Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've got 5 members here. We don't quite have a quorum, but we're going to go ahead and start as a subcommittee. Please call the roll.
Senator Wyland?
Senator Wyland's here. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry. Assemblymember Charlickson?
Here.
Scott Harvey?
Present.
Kathleen Moore? Here. Tom Sheehy?
Here. Okay, so we don't have a quorum, but we're going to go ahead and start with some of the non-action items. Rob, you want to go ahead and start with your executive officer report?
Certainly. Wanted to provide the board with an update on the October bond sale. The original target for that bond sale was about $4.5 billion. The market wasn't quite as accepting as we would have liked, but the Treasurer was still successful in selling over $4.1 billion in funds. The good news for this program is we received enough money from that bond sale to cover all of the projects that received an apportionment prior to the December 17th freeze. And through the March, April, and October bond sales, this program has received more funding than any other infrastructure program of the state, which is what I consider a great commitment that the state has had for school facilities. We will be working with the Treasurer's Office and the Department of Finance to expedite the transfer of those funds into our accounts so that we can then start releasing money as soon as possible. Also wanted to inform the board of a new duty that I've recently accepted. I have been asked and accepted to take on an interim role as a Deputy Director for the Department of General Services. I've been informed that this is an interim role only, and that there is an expiration date on it. And in the meantime, I'll be wearing 2 hats. But it's an honor to be tapped and for the duties. Also, this is a general notification to districts and others out there. Part of process improvements that we have going on within the Office of Public School Construction, we're trying to shift everything to an electronic state as we can, and we just launched an effort to have electronic meeting notifications to reduce all the paper that we issue, all the postage costs that we have, all the staff time involved in that, and at the other end in districts, sorting that mail, making sure that it gets to the right person, and so on. And so we initiated a web sign-up for that, and the results in the first wave have been very, very solid. We have 410 districts that have signed up for electronic meeting notification, nearly 30 other interested parties, and more than 1,000 recipients, all of which will just substantially reduce the amount of paper we're pushing through the office. And with that, my report is concluded.
Okay, please let the record show that Assemblywoman Fuller has joined us, and now we have a quorum. Senator Wyland. Yes.
I was get confused. Rob, just a couple of questions, and we may have gone over this before, but and Tom, you'll probably know this too. How are those bond sale allocations between all the various elements determined? Is that something that your board determines with the controller and treasurer? How is that determined? Does anyone know that? And I sort of ask that because obviously here we have an interest in making sure as much as possible.
Rob, would you like me to, since that question is probably more appropriately directed at somebody other than you, you're certainly welcome to answer it, but I'm guessing you probably don't want to because it's not really in your area of responsibility.
Yeah. All I can, I think it would be best to be directed at that. What I will tell you is how we go about communicating the need, at least. We, in advance of this last sale, There's some technical aspects about the bonds, the needs that we have within Proposition 1D, 47, and 55, and then certain of our programs require that they be taxable general obligation bonds. Some can be tax exempt. The bulk of it can come out of, be backed by Build America bonds. We provide that detailed information up to Department of Finance and the Treasurer's Office so that they know how to what denominations to sell in. But that's as far as.
The implication is that the administration through the Department of Finance and the Treasurer discuss that, or is that something that that I should direct to the Treasurer?
Senator Weiland, I'd be happy to take a stab at putting some more meat on the bone, so to speak. I think we've discussed this before in previous meetings, and of course our situation is dynamic and it's evolving. Going back to December 17th of 2008, almost a year ago, there was a chain of events that started that has had a pretty big impact on the state's public works process. And that event was the Pooled Money Investment Board voted unanimously to freeze all pooled money investment account loans. And the significance of that was that the PMIA, for many years, many years, through multiple administrations, has served as a source of funds that would be advanced for various public work projects, be they transportation, housing, water, school facilities programs, so on and so forth. And then at different times in the year when the conditions were most advantageous, the Treasurer would then go to market and sell bonds. And then those bond proceeds would be deposited back into the pooled money investment account to reimburse it, along with appropriate interest costs for the loans that it had made. The Pooled Money Investment Board voted to terminate what they call AB 55 loans in December because of the state's precarious cash position. Of course, we all know all the twists and turns, the many twists and turns that we went through this year as a state, as a legislature, as an administration to get to a final financial plan for fiscal year 9-10. And there were many twists and turns along the way, but one of the things that was consistent was that our cash position continued to remain very precarious. It resulted in the state controller delaying income tax refunds and, in fact, delaying the payment on bills for many, many months. While our situation has improved, it's still taking a tremendous amount of management by the controller, the treasurer, and the director of finance to make sure that we have enough cash to meet all of our day-to-day needs. It's taking a lot of management. I think that those three entities are doing a good job. California has sold a lot of bonds this year. I was in a meeting last week, I think it was, with Treasurer staff, and they were going through the list of all the bonds that have been sold. And in fact, they're in the market this week pricing bonds, and they're going to be in the market next week pricing more lease revenue bonds. So the numbers are moving around. But suffice it to say, at the meeting I was at last week, the statistics they had showed that we had already issued over $18 billion in general obligation bonds in California this year. And then in addition to that, almost $9 billion, I think $8.8 billion in revenue anticipation notes. And then there were additional issuances. We had to refinance some of the economic recovery bonds, which are issuances, and so on and so forth. The long and short of it is that the Treasurer staff pointed out that the state of California has, in fact, issued more debt than any other state or any other public or private entity in the United States. In this fiscal year, we are the largest issuer of debt of any entity. And what they said is, as a result of that, in some key maturities, and I don't remember all the details, but in some key maturities, because they sell these bonds at different maturities, our debt has saturated the market. So they're running into some problems there. Our disclosure statements are public documents, and in our disclosure statements we talk about all of the threats to the budget, and those also make investors nervous. So with respect to what's going on right now, Senator, it's a moving target. We're working with the Treasurer's office to maximize the bond sales. Our first priority has been to pay the bills for the work that had already been done And that's why, you know, it was so critical for us in the last sale to sell, I don't know, what was the total? Was it 500 and something, Rob?
Yeah, it looks like 503 million.
I think it was 503 million, and that was enough money to finally pay off the balance of those projects that had already received an actual apportionment. Recall, in December of '08, when the freeze was placed, there was $1.2 billion in apportionments that this body had made that was outstanding at the time, and they weren't able to get any fund releases because there were no PMIA loans. And then in March and April, the Treasurer sold bonds, and we were able to pay that down. But there was about 460 million or thereabouts in apportionments that were still outstanding for which we didn't have funds to disperse, right? And now, with the most recent sale, we have enough funds to fully cover 100%, correct me if I'm wrong, of that entire 1.2 billion. So that's a lot of progress. And you know, we've all been working hard to make that happen. As far as how everything sorts out going forward, it's a picture that's still evolving, and we're working closely with the Treasurer to do the best that we can.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a couple of comments. One is, as a board, in a way, we're a special interest, and I think that's good. And to the extent we can weigh in with the administration or Treasurer's office to make sure that when debt is issued, or the process, that we get as big a chunk as we can get. Because the reality is there are priorities, and you know, we've got, what is it, 10 billion for a high-speed rail, and we've got all these other priorities, and this process still seems a little murky to me, but you know, I want as much for schools as we can get. And the only other thing I'd note, and I'm sure the Treasurer is correct about the market and all that, just from having talked each time to multiple brokers, the retail demand is still pretty strong, and it's how much you can sell at a certain price. Because it was only, you know, not that long ago that we were selling bonds at 6% face value and that sort of thing, and it's only this more recent era of lower interest rates that we say, gee, you know, this is really, really expensive. We didn't think it was that expensive back in the 90s and 80s when we were issuing a lot of bonds. So that's something I think to also keep in mind. Obviously, there's budget pressures there, but trying to get as much as we can for school construction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Senator Weiland's bringing that up. And I know in the past we've, as a board, had some discussion of this and put, I think, in writing our sense of that priority, that education infrastructure school funding should be at the top of the PMI board and the other treasurers' analysis and Department of Finance analysis. I was going to make this comment under tab 10, reactivating the inactive apportionments, but it actually is timely with this discussion. It's a need I think we have to get additional information about this overall flow of bond indebtedness. The LAO has come out with some analysis of information, and the recently concluded, a few hours ago, concluded somewhat historic, as Senator Weil and I were remarking, somewhat historic deal on water. There were some outstanding issues that I think still need to be vigorously pursued, because the place we're at is really very, very precarious. As an understatement, I think, the way our chairman has stated it. And one of the issues that the LAO came out with during the hearings on water was whether we should be using the general fund to fund $10 billion, it's now $11.1 billion, of infrastructure for waterworks, or whether we should be using revenue-backed measures like user fees, like regulatory fees that are within our grasp to put forward. Governor Pat Brown, when he did the original state water plan, did a general obligation bond, but he backed it by the sale of the water from the projects, and it was a revenue-based system. So basically the LAO in testimony in front of the water committees in the Senate and the Assembly has underscored that the legislature will have to make a very tough choice, because we can't sell all the education bonds we can't finance them all that we've already got, let alone a new bond issue we're hoping to have in 2010, and the transportation bonds and the housing bonds and the rest of the other bonds. I think there's $60 billion or so in the queue of other bonds that's already been approved by the public. So the issue, one of the things that I was going to ask us to do is, as we reactivate the program, not to just have to go back and deactivate it again in a few months, because we face just an enormous budget catastrophe, I think, coming up in the next 18 months. 2 or 3 times we'll be at the brink of running out of cash and the brink of everything standing still. That we should just ask the Treasurer and perhaps the LAO to comment on the competition they see increasing between the education priority that we have here and these other needs of infrastructure. And I, for one, am going to be urging that the legislature continue to look at a fee-based program that could provide that $10 billion in a fair way from the actual water districts that need the water to pay for it, as they do now, and they've done historically for years, pay that part of the infrastructure need through a revenue stream, freeing up the process that our chairman just described, the Pooled Money Investment Board and the Treasurer being able to go into the market and sell our bonds. So I also, as a corollary to that, a report on where we are. The LAO is also concerned that our percentage of debt is now reaching 10%, something close to that, which is an historic high. And at some point, our marketability of our bonds and that debt ratio is very troublesome.
Thank you very much, Senator Torkelson, for your insightful comments. Are there more? Ms. Moore.
I would take it just one step further, and if the board determines that, to really put it into an action item, and that is perhaps a subgroup of the board, perhaps a couple of members, could meet with the Treasurer and the Department of Finance to express the concern, but also to look at if there's the possibility for a planning tool. And that is, given the situation that we're in and the limited amount of bonds that may be issued in the next year as well as this year, could we know a certain amount that may come to this program, and then be able to tell the school districts that are in limbo now that we're going to be able to tranche out perhaps in whatever increments over the next 4 quarters, so that districts can be prepared to ramp up or not with their projects. It takes a long time once the flow of funds starts again, or there's a flow, for districts to be able to go out and start bidding and really put their projects into the ground. So I'm wondering, in light of we don't really have that information, if we could send a couple of our board members to see if that's a possibility and report back to the board. Is anyone open for that? And you know, whoever, I know both of you are very interested in the issue. Perhaps it's, you know, you're the members. I'm not sure about legally. We don't want to have a quorum, but I do think that we need to make our concerns known and see if there's a planning tool that we can offer back to school districts.
Okay, so how would you like to proceed, Ms. Moore?
Well, I would make a motion that we send 2 of our board members to meet with the acting director of finance, or the new director of finance when they're appointed, and the treasurer, to express the concerns and to determine whether there is a method that we could plan, that we could give to our constituent base for planning for future bond sales.
All right, do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Ms. Moore, can you take the lead in helping to coordinate that effort?
Certainly. Why don't we just do it now?
Okay.
Assemblymember Weiland, Senator Weiland, excuse me, and Senator Torlakson, would you like to be our emissaries?
If it be the will of the committee, sure.
It is the will of the committee.
I would be happy to do it. I was going to say this later, and I've talked with Tom about it. I'm not going to be able to stay on the board. I've lost my key staff member who worked on all this, and I just I regret it, but I'm not going to be able to do that. And I'll mention that later again, but I would like to be part of that group because my interest in getting those funds is still there. So and I'd be happy to accompany.
Is there any objection to having Senator Weiland, regardless of his status, continuing to participate as part of that group? Seeing none, that should be fine.
So we probably would want a second member. Is there another member that is interested? If not, I certainly would be, but
Though it's going to be an alternate. If you're going to do that, I think it would be an alternate, just so we don't need to worry about an open meeting.
thank you.
With 3 or more members.
I think Assemblymember Weiland will no longer be a member of this committee. Even, as I gather, this is your last meeting.
That's true.
Okay.
There isn't he's just going to participate, but not as a member of the
Then that would be appropriate.
Okay.
I think Kathleen Moore would be the logical person to.
Right.
If there's no other interest, I certainly, the superintendent is very interested in the issue. I mean, it's time. We certainly would be honored to serve. And I think it's a very important issue. And so we shall do so, and we'll coordinate on that, Senator. Okay. Thank
Great.
you.
Kathleen, Ms. Moore, thank you very much. Is there more comments on that item? Mr. Duffy, did you want to address the board?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Tom Duffy for cash. First, we asked you last spring to commit to funding the entire $2.4 billion that had been apportioned through December of 2008. And we just want to comment that we appreciate your efforts as a board and also your staff and, of course, the Treasurer's Office for making that happen. We sent correspondence to you a couple days ago regarding the very matter of this discussion and what Ms. Moore was referring to. In the correspondence, we asked if you could ask for $3 billion of the future bond sales to commit for $2 billion for 2009. After your actions today, you will have unfunded approvals that will be just under the $2 billion mark. And then $1 billion for 2010, anticipating that there will be continued activity through next year. So just to try to frame those dollars amounts in request based upon the activity level of school districts applying for funds. So we just wanted to call your attention to that letter, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Okay. We have a consent calendar? We have 4 items that are kind of like consent specials.
We have a consent calendar, we have the minutes, and then we also have several items that are non-controversial.
Okay, we have Assemblymember Nielsen here. I know who would like to speak on item number 12. If it's okay if it agrees with the board, I know that we want to get through this as quickly as possible. Some of you have been putting in some pretty long hours. If we could move the minutes and the consent calendar, maybe go to Mr. Nielsen's item, and then we need to go into closed session. That would be my intent. Senator Hancock, did you?
Simply that I am going to need to leave in a couple of hours, so
Okay.
you can prioritize.
And for those folks that are wondering, that clock hasn't been changed, so it's actually 2:35 and not 3:35.
Right. Even so.
Okay, great. Senator Lowenthal?
Yeah, me too, myself also at 4:45.
Okay, very good, Senator. Thank you.
I'll move the minutes and the consent calendar.
All right, we have a motion on the minutes and the consent calendar.
Second.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, those items are approved. And I apologize, I didn't ask if anybody in the public wanted to comment on the consent calendar or the minutes, and so I will backtrack and open the floor to you if you do. Okay, seeing no interest there. Now, why don't we go to item number 12, which is the big school district
Right.
appeal.
Biggs Unified, and I'll introduce Jason Hernandez of our staff to
Okay, great.
to introduce the item.
Well, good afternoon. My name again is Jason Hernandez, and I'm the audit supervisor at OPSC for all the financial hardship projects that come through our door. Just as an overview, Biggs Unified is coming in for 4 modernization projects ranging from elementary through junior, senior high project. They're coming in for an estimated amount of $3.1 million in state apportionment, plus the $2.096 million in the financial hardship apportionment, for a total estimated cost of $5.2 million. Typically, when districts come in for financial hardship, per the regulations, there's 4 main criteria that they come in under. They come in under, if it's a smaller school district, they have a total bonding capacity of less than $5 million. If they've passed a bond within the last 2 years, a Prop 39 bond for the maximum amount, or if they have a total bonding capacity of, or bonded indebtedness of greater than 60%, is the 3 main criteria, or if it's a county office of education, then they qualify under the normal administrative criteria for financial hardship. There is one other option under other evidence, that a school district can come before the State Allocation Board and present their evidence to be considered for financial hardship status. So as today, Biggs Unified in Butte County does not meet one of the 4 aforementioned criteria for financial hardship status. Therefore, they have come in to present their case under evidence to the board to be considered for financial hardship status. If you turn to stamp page 160 at the top, there's a brief description on some of the measures the district has taken to show their reasonable evidence as far as their attempts to come up with their own matching share. They have met with the Butte County Office of Education and to see if they can consider issuing certificates of participation in order to finance their portion of the SFP school facility projects. According to the Butte County office, the district has recently moved from a negative interim declaration on their financial statements, which basically states that the district would not be able to meet their ongoing concerns for the next 3 years, to a positive status, which means they'll be able to make their ongoing concerns for the next year and for the following 2 years. But the Butte County office went on to say that if they were to absorb additional payments for the County Office of for a certificate of participation, that they would not be able to meet those ongoing concerns and would be in danger of going back under AB 1200 and having a negative status for their next interim report. The district has also attempted to pass and fail 2 general obligation bonds over the last year and a half. In February of 2008, they attempted a bond that only received a 48% vote. They went back to the voters back in November of 2008, and again, they only passed, they had a 45% yes vote at that time. So staff looked through all the main criteria that you look for when a district is coming forward for financial hardship consideration. Again, looking at that same criteria that we mentioned. They passed the bond, which obviously they failed the last 2 attempts. Do they have bond indebtedness? Currently, looking through their financial records, they do not have any bonded indebtedness at the district. Or is their total bonding capacity level less than $5 million? And currently they're at approximately $11.5 million, so they don't meet that criteria as well. Turning to the next page, stamp page 161. Basically, the staff looked at the main reasons that the district is coming in. One, obviously they lack the matching funds to contribute to their SFP projects. They have attempted bonds, as mentioned, without success. And the district is, even though they've recently changed their status from a negative to a positive status, if they were to go forward and issue a certificate of participation, the county said they would be in danger of going back to a negative declaration. We did do a review of their available capital facility funding, which would include developer fees, any possible redevelopment funds, or any other type of capital project or facility funds would be available to the district. And through our determination, see that number of $70,168, and those are the numbers of the funds that we found available at the time. We've listed some examples here of past districts that have come before the board. Any districts that have come through have not been approved for under other evidence. There have been a few examples. A couple listed here. One was Monterey Peninsula. They had a unique situation where Fort Ord closed on the district, and they were losing several million, 10 million annually in federal impact dollars. They also had attempted and failed a bond, and they were in danger of becoming an AB 1200 district and having their status listed as negative. Needles Unified was another district that came forward. They were initially were approved by the board, but they were only approved for their design phase of their construction. The board directed the district to come back, before they come back for their full construction, to attempt another local bond measure or seek other means of local financing in order to contribute to their projects before coming back to the board. So as we go through, we have three options available to the board for you today. Option one was similar to a prior district, such as Needles, where we would approve the district for their design funding at this time, which would allow the district to move forward with initial planning on of their construction projects and their modernization projects, but would still require them to come back and seek other types of financing, whether it's seek another bond measure, whether to see if any of the developer fees increase during that time frame, or any other financing mechanism that might be available to the district before they come in for full construction, and to follow past practice that's been approved by the board in the past. If you turn to stamp page 162, lists option two. And option two is basically just granting the district's request for financial status for both their design grant and their construction grant, which would allow the district to move forward with their project. Basically, the board would be stating that they have made a reasonable effort to fund their matching share, but potentially this option may be going against past practice and may be setting precedent. And option three would be to deny the district's appeal, that per the regulations that to state that the district has not made all reasonable effort, and that in order to be qualified for financial hardship status, they must meet one of the initial qualifying criteria that I mentioned earlier. So staff recommends that we approve option one, to approve the district for design funding and to have them seek other funding, whether it be COP, bond measures, or other financing before they come in to consider construction apportionment for their financial hardship projects. And with that, I'll open up to questions for the board.
Okay, questions of the board members for OPSC staff. Okay, let's hear from the big school district. Okay, Assemblyman Nielsen, if you prefer to go first, that's fine. I thought whatever your pleasure is, Assemblyman. Okay, please come ahead. Identify yourself for the record, please. Can you push the button for the microphone, Mr. Cornelius?
Can you hear me?
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Bill Cornelius. I'm superintendent of Biggs Unified School District.
Please, Mr. Cornelius, would you like to present your view of this issue and what the outcome you'd like to see?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is my third year as superintendent, and of all years to come into a superintendency, it's been very interesting. I came into Biggs Unified School District 3 years ago, and Biggs is located about 25 miles south of Chico. It's a large geographical area, pretty much all agriculture. We have a small district, around 600 students, and some of the things that I inherited coming in, talked about the budget. We were below reserve 3 years ago. We are now positive after 3 years, and in the times that we have currently, I think that's definitely a plus for us. Sometimes it hurts when it comes under critical hardship, but that's what we need to do with our district. We also had program improvement things going on with the district. We are now program improvement free. We've met all the target growth and everything from the state. The biggest issue we face right now, we've been facing, is our current facilities. And what we did was, prior to my coming on, the group had come to OPSC and met with, because of substantial modernization needs, they met with OPSC and was given the advice to run for a bond. Well, the current administration did not do that. When I first came on in 2000, 2007, 2008, that was one of the first things we undertook. Our facilities are old. The schools were built in the 1950s, 1960s, and had not been kept up to meet the needs of our students. Old, the computers and other things that are currently needed in classrooms and all those kinds of things. We have just some old infrastructure things. I was shared with this by a group that helped us run the second bond. Was out of the 28 districts they had worked with, ours was probably in the worst shape. So over the past 2.5, 3 years, when the first bond did not pass, and I'll address that again later, we didn't sit back. We started to do things we could as a district to help do some school improvements, and then when we went back to work on the bond the second time, even though we did not pass the second bond, again I'll cover that in just a second, but we developed a Be the Difference group, and that's the community coming in and supporting, trying to do what they can with some program improvements at the school. But it's not nearly enough of what we need for all the infrastructure things that need to happen in our district. Our modernization eligibility is it's a total eligibility of $5.2 million, and that requires a district match of $2,096,318. Because we barely make our 3-year multi-year projection, as you heard, the county said if we tried to find another way of financing this, we would not be able to certify as positive. And as you know, in our area, the last few years, of course, it goes back further than that, but agriculture, which is our main economy, has been struggling. It's been difficult. So in our small rural community, it's been very, very tough. And so for us, and I did all the walking, both bonds, as far as walking and talking to nearly all the folks in Biggs. And why weren't we able to pass the bond the first time? Why weren't we able to pass the bond the second time? These are hard times. These are very difficult times, and hits the small rural agricultural communities, I think, first. And so everyone that I talked to in our community said there's no question our schools need help. This is just a tough time for us. Some of them are on fixed incomes and a variety of other things. So we were close on the passing of the bonds, but not quite enough. The community has not stepped back. They wanted. We need a football stadium painted. We had 60 people out there painting the stadium. We've done some painting at our high school. They're superficial things, but they really the community.
Excuse me, Mr. Cornelius.
Am I getting off track?
I want you to get everything out that you want to say, but okay. I would ask you to try to stay to the immediate question at hand because we are under a little bit of a time constraint today. Will do. Thank you.
Okay. In order to qualify for financial hardship, the district must be levying the maximum developer fee justified under law. It must meet one of five criteria. Criteria 1 through 4, as you heard, do not apply to the district. Therefore, the district decided to apply for financial status based on the 5th criteria, other evidence of reasonable effort. The district first met with OPSC in April 2006 to discuss applying under other, and you have a timeline in front of you for that. Continued to meet with OPSC through the present and has taken OPSC's suggestions of attempting bonds. To date, the district has attempted 2 bonds and failed. Bond 1 was February 5th of 2008 as a grassroots effort. The amount was for $4.275 million, and it was 51% no and 49% yes. The second bond was in November 4th of 2008. We used a bond consultant at that time. The amount at that time was for $6.9 million. There were 54% no and 46% yes. And we sent a copy of this to your office. A precedent has been established by the State Allocation Board's approval of the 2001 Lassen Union High School District's request for financial hardship funding based on other evidence of reasonable effort, which included 2 failed bonds. The specifics of the school district that was approved in 2001 are substantially similar to those of Biggs Unified School District. Therefore, based on Biggs' 2 attempts to pass bonds and the 2001 precedent-setting financial hardship approval, we request your support of the Biggs Unified School District's appeal for financial hardship funding for our 4 modernization projects in the amount of $2,096,318 for total project eligibility of $5,240,794. We request that your option would support that of option 2, which would provide design and construction funds for the district's modernization projects.
Thank you, Mr. Cornelius. So you are urging us to adopt option number 2?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. Assemblyman Nielsen.
Chairman Shee and members of the Allocation Board, it's an honor to come and appear before you to support the request of Biggs and allow me a moment of nostalgia for my decade of serving on this august body.
Really?
I served with the irascible and revered Leroy Green for all of those years, and I think I'm 3rd or 4th longest tenured member in the history of this board. Now, some of your regulations and rules may have changed. I'm not sure. But I am familiar with these kinds of requests, and there were precedential grants of these requests in years hence, based on hardship and based on reasonable effort that they have put forth. And I think that the district, the community, has put forth their best efforts. And we all know the difficulty with bonds, and I am very familiar with these kinds of areas and this kind of agriculture, because I am it. In fact, our home is only about an hour to the west of this place, and one of our former colleagues, which has nothing to do with your criteria, but Doug Lamalfa went to the elementary school here. The smaller districts do have very unique problems. Of course, the big districts do too. But that said, and knowing the manifest needs, the deterioration, the lack of maintenance, another thing of your purview here, deferred maintenance, but it hasn't been adequately maintained, and they do need your help. And I would respectfully request your favorable consideration of the request of Biggs for option number 2. And thank you very much for the time. It feels good to be back with you, if but for a moment. And we'll get out of here so you members can be about your busy days. And now I can say good afternoon to all of you who I said good morning to about 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Assemblyman Nielsen. We appreciate you taking the time to come here. Pleasure of the board.
I have a quick question.
It's more. It's more than Ms. Hancock.
Of staff.
And then
The last item wasn't included in the write-up, and they have indicated that there was similar circumstances. Could you comment on that?
Sure. The main reason, looking back at that last item that was approved back in December of '01, was that it was prior to the main regulations of the hardship changing. In the beginning of, I think it was believed January of '02, we switched to, prior before, just for one example, you used to be able to have a total bond indebtedness of only 30%, and that was increased to a 60% threshold. I think also believed previously that if your district was less than $7 million, then they lowered it down to $5 million as far as the threshold you need to qualify. So the basic thing was that since it was under other body of criteria when that decision was made, and post decisions were made under the new criteria, which basically either didn't approve the board items under other evidence or require the districts to come back in showing effort they made before applying for construction, was the main reason we didn't include it.
That answers that part of the question, but can you also answer, is it a similar circumstance? They indicate that there were 2 bond measures attempted in the community, that there was a small community, and that the board made the decision to grant them essentially option 2.
Yeah, just to go back through it on that item, it was a smaller district up in Lassen County, and that one had also attempted 2 bond measures that had failed. It didn't list as much information back then, so I couldn't tell if it was in danger of becoming AB 1200 at that time. but some of the circumstances were similar.
Thank you.
Senator Hancock.
Thank you. I think the reports and the comments were quite complete. You know, I have to say, having looked over the material that was presented quite carefully, I think that it would be a very dangerous thing for this board at this time, with our limited amount of money, to grant this request. Every district has had to absorb significant revenue reductions. If not being able to pass a bond or being recently removed from being under financial supervision were a criteria for full funding with no local participation, many, many more districts would come in and request that, and we would have set a precedent by doing that. None of the currently required hardship conditions is met. The citing of a precedent from 2001 indicates that if we should set a precedent like this today, we will certainly have it cited back to us in the coming months and years. So I appreciate the difficulty. There are districts with great difficulty all over the state. I know that some of the districts that I represent, like West Contra Costa County, have repeatedly passed bonds despite having a very low income population and paying back a loan to the state from when they went bankrupt 25 years ago. Now, it would simply seem to me that this lowers the bar to a point that the future bond monies of the state would be in jeopardy. So I would move option 3, that we deny the request.
Okay. We have a motion, a second, but I suspect there's going to be interest in some more discussion. I have Senator Weiland and then Senator Lowenthal.
For the superintendent, I have a question. The maintenance, you said the maintenance had not been done, so I assume that for a number of years there was no money in your budget for maintenance. Is that how that happened?
I would say because of the financial budget that they were looking back, they were not able to keep up with the taking care of the facilities.
How about now?
Now, again, our maintenance budget is extremely small because we're just trying to make
How big is your budget?
Our deferred maintenance is $110,000.
And how big is the entire budget for the district?
$6.2 million.
Can you give us an idea of what you intend to do? You mentioned computers, and I don't think that's covered. I don't know if it is. And something about a football field. Can you give us an idea of what projects would happen?
We have several projects outlined, anywhere from re-upping a lot of the electrical that needs major upgrades to we have ceilings that are in bad repair, not roofs, but the ceilings inside. We've got, some of the heating, air conditioning, some of the we have a listing of a variety of projects that are just in desperate need of fixing up within the classrooms. Our science classroom is so old. The gas lines and the water lines don't work inside the classroom. Some other things like that. So it's there's at each of the sites, because of not being kept up as well as they should have been.
How many sites do you have?
We have
students.
We have 4 sites. We have an elementary school, a middle school, a high school. The elementary and middle school are on the same campus, and then we have a small elementary school out in Richville. So we have basically
And then one high school?
one high school. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Senator Lowenthal.
Thank you. You know, I wasn't prepared to really speak, or I wasn't going to really, I shouldn't say prepared, going to speak on this issue. When I come into the hearing, I thought I would be probably either supporting number one or option number two. But I just lived through a historic time yesterday in which we've moved forward as a state, and I supported, although reluctantly because of the tremendous overall need, to say that we're going to put a greater and greater way of funding projects out of the general obligation bond. General obligation bonds are going to, which are the kinds of bonds that we're talking about here also. We're now going to do water projects out of the, rather than, which we've historically done, which was the point I think that was raised earlier, out of the beneficiaries to pay their fair share. We're not moving in that direction. And so this proposal is going to potentially do an expansion of that also. It's going to say that financial hardship categories are going to change now. We're going to kind of lessen them. If you've had an economic impact in your community and you really can't support these projects, we're going to let the general obligation bonds begin to fund more and more of that. I think this is a very dangerous precedent. This keeps putting off the reality, the inevitable reality that this model of what we're going down is not sustainable. This is a non-sustainable model of more and more general obligation picking up the funding for this state. That's where we're going. And I think that's a very, very dangerous thing. And so after living through last night and saying this is the last time I'm going to do a general obligation bond, I'm sitting here talking about an expansion of impacts upon general obligation bonds. I'm not going there anymore until we figure this system out. We as a state have got to figure out, just because we can't see the impacts, we can't live that way. We can't be like the rest of what happened to this nation, which came to its knees when we just increased debt service so high in the nation that people couldn't pay their debt. We cannot go that route. And so I'm having a very hard time, and I've switched where I am because I think we have we have to figure this system out. That's why I'm glad we're going to go and talk about this. But I'm not into voting for anybody changing any rules, any more impacts on general obligation bonds at this moment. So I'm going to vote for number 3.
Okay, so we have a motion, a second. Now we want to hear from Assemblywoman Fuller, and we want to go back then. We'll go back to Mr. Weiland. Ms. Fuller.
I'm pretty much in agreement with what you just said, Senator, about we are going to have to just look at how we do bonds. You know, there's nothing like the agony we went through last night. We had a giant crisis and had to make an even worse choice to fix an absolute crisis. So here we are headed towards the next absolute crisis in a hurry. But I would like to point out a few things that might help us make this decision, because unfortunately school districts, you know, have to operate under the circumstances that they're in. We put them in the circumstances by approving all these rules ourselves. We were the ones that, there was legislation that changed it to other reasonable, and that's a legitimate statute-driven criteria now, since I think it was like last year when that bill passed. And so here's someone that has followed the rules and done their expectation in a community that is waiting. And sort of at the end of the day, we're going to give all this money away, and then we're going to go back out and we're going to figure out how to finance the next round. There's no doubt about that. And we have to do it better, and we have to do it smarter, and we have to do it different. But right now, this school district, if you look at this, they have not very many classrooms. I think they had like somewhere around, 300 kids or something. It wasn't a lot. 600. Thanks, I don't have my glasses on, yeah. And at some point, the problem for school districts are, like they're saying they don't have any maintenance money in their maintenance account. That generally happens because when they're so small, they can't do an economy of scale. So when they cut, they can't cut any contracted thing, any of the union stuff. So they're going to have to take out of whatever small reserve accounts they have, such as maintenance, and so that cleans that out. And now if their buildings are truly falling apart or over 30 years old or whatever they are, then we're asking them to rebuild those buildings every couple months with no money, as opposed to providing a financial hardship scholarship that we have to put a new campus or building or whatever it is they want that does away with all that, rebuilding it over and over and over, that's not cost efficient and isn't good for the kids. So I'm really conflicted. I agree with the financial logic, but I think I would like to really consider the staff's option, because they're going to be watching this. We're going to hope some things change, and they're not going to let them start building or go into debt or any of those kinds of things if we do option 1. If we do option 3, we're going to force them into trying to make repairs on things that probably can't be repaired with no money, and that's not really a good option when it was our fault that we made the legislation that gave them the expectation of other reasonable methods. So I'm conflicted, and I'd rather go for 1 than for 3, but I don't dispute at all the judgments that you have all raised about where we are.
I haven't heard from Ms. Brownlee yet, so Ms. Brownlee and then Senator Weiland.
Thank you. This is a tough one for me too, but I think based on hearing Ms. Fuller's comments too, it makes me think that really so many districts up and down the state right now don't have deferred maintenance because we've cut deferred maintenance out of their budget. So regardless of scale, and I understand the scale argument, and it certainly does apply to smaller school districts, but I think every single district is wrestling with this issue of deferred maintenance. And in some sense, it feels to me that the part of the responsibility of the district here is to also make their prioritizations as well. I mean, we're talking about projects that the district wants to do that spans a couple of different things. Well, I think we need to prioritize in terms of if it's the ceilings, the classrooms that are in greatest disrepair over football fields or other kinds of things. I think that the district sort of needs to prioritize, and of course the financing of these modernization and or new construction projects are based on a match with the community. And I understand that you've gone out for 2 bonds and have been unsuccessful with 2 bonds, but there's scale in that as well in terms of the amount that you go out, in terms of what the taxpayer would have to pay, so forth and so on. There is a question of the maximization of the developer fees, and is there a place in terms of going back to the drawing board here to come up with a prioritization of projects and be able to come up with a match that can come out of the district that can accommodate the most necessary repairs that need to take place. Sorry, it's like la 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 la. So my tendency is to support the motion to deny the request.
Okay, thank you. Now, Ms. Moore and then Senator Weiland.
Won't belabor the points. I agree very wholeheartedly that this program was set up with a match in mind, and that local communities needed to complete that match. However, I cannot support the total denial of it, and I thought that option 1 was a compromise in that it in essence said that the state is willing to support this community at $300,000, and that the rest of the funds, I believe it was $2 million essentially, would have to come from local sources. And what it does is leverage back to the local community to say that you are going to have to pass a bond measure in order for these projects to move forward, and the state has made their investment. So I would support option 1.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Senator Weiland.
I concur that I would support option 1. I think number one, look at the actual amount of money. We're talking $200,000 or $300,000. And I understand the precedent, but having some familiarity with districts like this, there's also, I think, a greater difficulty in passing bond issues. And I think it has to do with, well, a whole bunch of cultural reasons. And it seems to me that if we picked the option one, the amount of money is very small. It's unlikely to bring a flood of people to us. And I don't know how many there are like this who've tried a couple of bonds. I was on a board where certainly we had tried at least one that had failed. I just don't see a lot of districts coming to us. And then the other thing is it would allow the district to actually really prioritize, because the reality is a football field, to me, in this situation is not that important. But falling ceilings, no water or no gas lines to a classroom is a pretty big deal. So that would allow that design to actually focus on what you absolutely have to provide in a decent environment. So I'd support option one for those reasons.
Okay, thank you. Now, we do have a motion and a second on the floor, which was to adopt staff recommendation number 3. Please. Oh, sure. Ms. Brownlee.
One clarifying question. So on option 1, if we were to approve that, does that preclude the district from coming back for another hardship request for the actual brick and mortar portion of it? Because this is actually providing money for the design phase, but actually not for the building out phase. So does this preclude them, or is this sort of a, we're going to give you this now and then you have the opportunity to come back to request financial hardship for the other portion of the project?
No, yeah, you're correct. Under the current regulations, it does not preclude them from coming back for the full construction dollars. In the past, it's given the district an opportunity to, I know we mentioned a lot of discussion about the bonds or to seek other type of financing first before coming back.
So just to follow up on that question, so if we were to choose option 3, is the district denied from coming back again to request hardship? If they go back to the drawing board, so to speak, do they have the opportunity to come back again?
I think it would be under the same circumstances that any district, regardless of why they were not approved or not qualified for hardship status, it doesn't preclude them from applying in the future if the circumstances changed. Now, obviously, if it was the exact same circumstances that they were coming in again for.
Okay. So we do have a motion and a second on the floor. Could you please call the roll?
Senator Lowenthal. Senator Hancock. Senator Weiland. Assemblymember Fuller. No. Assemblymember Brownlee. Aye. Assemblymember Torlakson. No. Scott Harvey. Aye. Kathleen Moore.
No.
Tom Sheehy.
I'm going to abstain. That motion doesn't have sufficient support to pass. Is there another motion on the floor?
I would move option 1.
We have a motion and a second to approve option number 1. Ms. Genera, could you please call the roll?
Excuse me, I'd
Sorry.
like to make just a brief comment
Absolutely.
on that. It's never easy to turn districts down. We've done that sometimes on this board, and we've often tried not to. In this case, I want to say that if in the past other reasonable effort has not meant any reason at all, and if we couldn't pass a bond becomes a reason to come in, and the fact that there is deferred maintenance is a reason to come in, then we should say in public policy that any district in the state that cannot pass a bond and has deferred maintenance can come and get help from this board. And if we do that, we are going down a track, as Senator Lowenthal indicated, that is, in my view, a very unwise use and a real change in the intention of the previous policies of this board. There is nothing, as Ms. Brownlee had pointed out, that precludes them from reprioritizing, going back a third time. There are districts that have gone back a third time to ask their people to support their efforts to support their children. And I think that it's not unreasonable to do so in this case, so I will vote no.
Mr. Harvey.
As the maker of the original motion, I too am going to vote no on this for the reasons so stated. I would be much more comfortable if this district stepped away and did what has been suggested relative to prioritizing. I think that's the piece we're missing, but I'm voting no on this secondary motion for the reasons stated.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Ms. Jenner, I'm going to request that you give, I'm sorry, folks, and I wasn't up all night like you. What was the vote count on the first motion, please?
4 aye, 4 no, 1 abstain.
Okay. Could you please, so that we have a motion and a second on the floor for option number 1, could you please call the roll?
Senator Lowenthal. No. Senator Hancock. No. Senator Wyland. Assemblymember Fuller. Assemblymember Brownlee.
No.
Assemblymember Torlakson.
Aye.
Scott Harvey.
No.
Kathleen Moore.
Aye.
Tom Sheehy.
Aye. Okay, that motion fails too. I would like to try one more time. The chair now will move option number 3. Is there a set? Did it?
No. No,
It has
that's
5 votes.
yeah. 5-4.
If it's okay with the board, I'd like to try, I'm prepared to change my vote and vote for option number 3. I don't know if that'll convince anybody else. That gives us one more vote. Can we try option 3 one more time? I'm going to make a motion, Mr. Harvey seconds, to adopt option number 3. Please call the roll.
Point of procedure. Didn't we just approve this item?
You actually voted aye on that, and that passed, so it was 5-4.
No, it takes 6
It's
votes.
6 votes.
Oh, does it?
It takes 6 votes.
Oh, for a hardship.
Vote for the hardship. It's particular to the hardship.
Oh, it just
No,
takes 6 votes to pass an action item.
It takes 6 votes to move an item on this board.
Yeah, we're short a member.
Thank you.
But I'm wondering, can we, once a motion has been
That's a
failed,
right.
can you
Good
bring
question.
it back again?
You know, Ms. Brownlee, that's a really good question, and I'll honestly tell you, I'll tell you that I'm not sure. What would the proper procedure be then? Would it be to ask for reconsideration of motion number 3?
Well,
All right, I will move that we reconsider option number 3. Is there a second? Okay. This vote is to grant the reconsideration. Please call the roll.
this is to grant
This is to grant reconsideration not to vote on option number 3.
at another meeting.
No, at this meeting.
Okay, I'd just like to point out that we'll talk later about the rules, that reconsideration
Has to be at a future
under those
meeting?
rules would be at another meeting. But I'm comfortable with this.
Glad you raised that point. One of the suggested rules I had was to adopt Robert's Rules of Procedures, and if that's Robert's, then that's what we would do. Yeah, we haven't adopted it, so if
Consider under Roberts at the same meeting.
you can? Okay.
I'm
talking about the rules of one house.
Okay.
and I'm comfortable with.
All right.
Comfortable with that.
Please call the roll on the motion to reconsider the vote on option number 3.
Senator Lowenthal. Senator Hancock. Senator Wyland. Assemblymember Fuller. Assemblymember Brownlee. Assemblymember Torlakson. Scott Harvey.
Aye.
Kathleen Moore.
No.
Tom Sheehy.
Aye. Didn't pass either, did it? Members, I am maybe I guess we have two choices. We can put this item over for future deliberation, or if somebody would like to make a new motion, it doesn't appear that we had enough movement.
I would make a motion that we put this over, and in the interim, that we ask the district for a specific list of what it is they want to do. I mean, I don't want to even give planning money. I'm very sympathetic, and I'm very sympathetic to small districts, but I don't even want to give planning money, frankly, to a football field. I would for a, ceilings that are falling down. So the motion would be that
to put it over?
To put it over.
Mr. Harvey, you want to second that?
I'll be happy to second that.
Is there any opposition to Mr. Weiland's motion? Seeing none, we're all in favor. That motion carries. This item will be put over for future consideration in another SAB meeting. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to recess into closed session. We will reconvene in open session in approximately 30 to 40 minutes.